The air in my home office was thick with the scent of old books and stale coffee, a familiar comfort that now felt like a shroud. I stood in the shadows, a ghost in my own life, staring at the darkness around me. My heart, a pendulum of grief, swung between a cold, hard anger and a bottomless, aching despair. In the hallway, 3 suitcases, a laptop bag, and a leather briefcase stood sentinel, a neat, mocking summary of 8 years of marriage. It didn't feel real. Not yet. Then I heard it. The familiar creak of the front door, followed by the sharp, staccato click of heels against the tile floor. Alara's steps, a rhythm I knew as well as my own heartbeat, echoed through the silence of the house. But there was no warmth in their sound tonight, only a brittle, hurried cadence. She stopped abruptly. I knew she'd seen the luggage. I waited, my breath held tight in my chest, knowing what was coming. Her voice, when it finally came, cut through the air like a shard of glass, trembling but sharp. "You're insane," she said, her tone rising with each syllable, a crescendo of disbelief and fury. "You're leaving me? Leaving our 2 sons? Over one mistake?" She paused, her eyes searching the shadowed alcove of my office, as if trying to locate the man she thought she knew, the man she thought she could control. Because of Leo? A stupid, drunken mistake at a party? I didn't answer. What could I say? This wasn't about one mistake, and deep down, she knew it, too. But Alara, my beautiful, complicated Alara, wasn't ready to admit that. Not yet. She took a step closer, her frustration a palpable force in the room, evident in the clipped, angry pace of her movements. "I didn't have an affair, David. I didn't betray you," she continued, her voice climbing, becoming shrill. "You're out of your mind if you think I did." I raised a hand to stop her, a quiet, simple gesture that somehow worked. She froze mid-step, her eyes narrowing as she tried to decipher me, this stranger sitting in the shadows of our shared life. I saw a kaleidoscope of emotions flicker across her face then. Anger, fear, and finally, a profound, unsettling confusion. She didn't understand what had changed, what had pushed me to this precipice. But how could she? Even I struggled to put it into words. There was no singular, cataclysmic event, no grand, dramatic betrayal. It was years of small, almost imperceptible things, words left unsaid, touches that no longer lingered, glances that didn't quite meet. It was the slow, creeping death of 1,000 tiny cuts. And tonight, those little things, those silent, invisible wounds, had all piled up. And now, they were suffocating me. "I'm sorry, Alara," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, the words feeling inadequate, hollow. "I truly am." Her face hardened at my words, the softness of her features giving way to a sharp, brittle anger. The tension in her jaw betrayed her frustration. "Sorry? That's all you have to say," she snapped, her voice a whip. "After everything? After our family, our boys, our life together? You're just sorry." She took another hesitant step closer. This time, I didn't stop her. A part of me, a small, foolish part, wanted her to reach me, to shake me out of whatever she thought this was. Maybe if she touched me, the weight of her hand, the familiarity of her skin against mine, would tether me to the life I was about to leave behind. But no, that wasn't going to happen. Not tonight. "I don't understand," she said, her voice softer now, the anger giving way to a raw, pleading vulnerability. "Can you at least tell me why? Can you do that for me?" Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with desperation. I wanted to answer her. I wanted to give her the clarity she deserved, the neat, tidy explanation that would make sense of this chaos. But how could I explain what even I was still in the process of unraveling? So instead, I said nothing. The silence stretched between us, a vast, oppressive, and unyielding void. I could see the questions racing through her mind, the frantic search for a logical reason. Was I having a breakdown? Did something happen at the party that I hadn't told her about? The truth was both simpler and more devastating. I had seen our life for what it truly was, and I couldn't unsee it. She took a step back, her movements hesitant, uncertain, as though she was afraid of what I might say or not say. I watched her carefully, noting every subtle shift in her expression, every flicker of emotion in her eyes. This wasn't the Alara I'd married 8 years ago. That Alara, the fiery, confident woman who had captivated me from the moment I met her, would have demanded answers, her eyes blazing with righteous indignation. This Alara, though, she looked like she was unraveling before me, unsure of her footing, unsure of us. "David," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, a fragile, broken sound. "Please, please, just talk to me." For a moment, a long, agonizing moment, I considered it. I almost opened my mouth to spill everything I'd been holding in, to tell her about the crushing, soul-shattering realization I'd had tonight. But I stopped myself. Words wouldn't fix this. Words had never been enough for us. So instead, I leaned back in the chair, sinking further into the shadows, a man retreating into the darkness of his own mind. "I'll explain," I said quietly. But not yet. Her shoulders slumped at my response, a visible deflation of her spirit. I could see the fight draining out of her, replaced by a weary, resigned acceptance. It wasn't fair. I knew that. But neither was staying in a marriage that had long since fractured under the weight of unspoken truths and unmet needs. For now, though, I let the silence speak for me. And Alara, she stood there, staring at me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve, a book written in a language she no longer understood. Neither of us moved. The space between us, once filled with love and laughter, grew wider, deeper, with each passing, silent second. Alara's question, her desperate, trembling plea, hung in the air between us like a ghost. "Can you at least tell me why? Can you do that for me?" Her voice, so fragile, so broken, made me feel like a villain in my own story, a cold, heartless destroyer of worlds. I could see her searching my face for answers, for something, anything, that would make sense of the suitcases in the hallway, the shadows that cloaked me, and the man she no longer recognized. But the truth wasn't a gift I could simply hand her, tied up in a neat little bow. It was a tangled, messy thing, a knot of unspoken resentments and quiet disappointments that had been tightening for years. I let out a slow, heavy breath, leaning forward until my elbows rested on my knees, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I had a moment of epiphany. I said finally, my voice steady but low, each word carefully chosen, deliberately placed. Her brow furrowed, a delicate, confused line appearing between her eyebrows. "A moment of epiphany," she repeated, her tone tinged with a sharp, incredulous disbelief. "What does that even mean, David? Why are you doing this?" I leaned back into the chair, letting the shadows swallow me again, a welcome reprieve from the raw, searching intensity of her gaze. For years, I'd been the one with the explanations, the one who could articulate thoughts with a practiced, academic clarity and precision. I taught literature, for God's sake. Words were my craft, my currency. But now, with Alara standing there, desperate for a reason, for a single, logical thread to cling to, I found myself struggling to simplify what had so profoundly, so irrevocably, unfolded in my mind just hours ago. I realized something. I began cautiously, my voice a low murmur in the quiet room. Something that's been staring me in the face for years, but I've been too blind, or maybe just too stubborn, to see. She crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive posture that was both familiar and, tonight, heartbreaking. Her frustration, a simmering pot just below the surface, began to boil over. "Great," she snapped, her voice sharp, cutting. "Another one of David's brilliant revelations. Put it in words I can actually understand, for once." I winced at the sharpness of her tone, the years of unspoken grievances now bubbling to the surface. But I didn't retaliate. She was lashing out because she was hurt, because she was confused, and I was the one who'd put her in that position. I shifted slightly in the chair, lowering my head until it rested against my clasped fists. "We live our lives consumed by the little things," I said slowly, measuring each word, each syllable. "Waking up, brushing our teeth, going to work, paying bills, watching TV, dealing with the kids. It's an endless, relentless cycle. And we're so caught up in it, so focused on just getting through the day, that we don't stop to look at the bigger picture. We just keep moving, keep existing, without ever asking ourselves what it's all for." Her arms tightened around her chest as she leaned against the doorway, her silhouette a stark, lonely figure against the warm, inviting light of the hallway. "What does that have to do with you leaving me? Leaving the boys?" I looked up at her, my eyes meeting hers for the first time that night, a silent, painful acknowledgement of the chasm that had opened between us. "Because tonight," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I saw it. The bigger picture." I stepped back from all the noise, all the distractions, and for the first time, I truly saw our life. She stared at me, her lips parting slightly, as though she wanted to interrupt, to argue, to deny what I was about to say. But she didn't. Her silence, a rare and unsettling thing, felt like an invitation to continue. So I did. "I saw who we are," I said, my voice soft but unyielding, each word a carefully placed stone in the foundation of this new, terrible reality. Who we were, and who we've become. And I realized something that I've been too afraid to admit to myself, let alone to you. Her body stiffened, her grip on herself tightening, a physical manifestation of her inner turmoil. "And what's that?" she asked, her voice a fragile, trembling thread of sound. "That our marriage," I said, the words feeling like a betrayal, a sacrilege on my tongue, "was a mistake." Her gasp was audible, a sharp, ragged intake of breath. She took a step back, as though the words had physically struck her, had pushed her away from me. "A mistake?" she repeated, her voice shaking, incredulous. "How can you say that? After everything we've built? Everything we've shared? How can you call it a mistake?" I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself, gathering the strength to deliver the final, fatal blow. This wasn't easy for me, either. This was the tearing down of my own life, the demolition of my own heart. "Because we love each other, Alara," I said finally, opening my eyes to meet her tear-filled gaze. "But we don't love each other the way a husband and wife should. Not anymore." She shook her head vehemently, a wild, desperate denial. Tears, hot and angry, glistened in her eyes. "That's not true. I love you, David. I've always loved you." I smiled sadly, a weary, resigned curve of my lips. "You love me, but you're not in love with me. There's a difference. And we both know it. You've known it for years, just like I have. We've been holding on to the idea of what we should be, not what we actually are." Her tears spilled over then, a silent, shimmering trail down her cheeks. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice cracking, her denial a desperate, last-ditch effort to hold back the tide. "This is about the party, isn't it? About Leo. It was one stupid mistake, David. One moment of bad judgment." I shook my head, a slow, tired movement. "It's not about Leo, Alara. It's not about the party. It's about everything that led us to that moment. It's about the silence that's grown between us like a weed, choking the life out of everything we once were. It's about the intimacy that feels more like a routine, a chore, than a genuine connection. It's about the fact that I can feel you pulling away from me, even when you're right next to me." Her breath hitched as she tried to steady herself, to find her footing in this new, terrifying landscape. "You're wrong," she whispered, her voice a raw, pleading sound. "You're so wrong." "I wish I were," I said quietly, the words a painful admission of my own heartbreak. "Because I love you, Alara. I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. But love isn't enough. It's not enough to keep two people together when the rest of the pieces don't fit." Her hands fell to her sides, her body slumping as if the fight had finally drained out of her. She stared at me with a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, terrible understanding. "You're giving up," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "You're giving up on us." I nodded slowly, a heavy, final gesture. "No," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I'm not giving up. I'm giving us a chance to find something better. To stop pretending that this is enough, when we both know, deep down, that it's not." Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time since she walked through that door, she looked truly, utterly defeated. "I don't understand," she murmured, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I know," I said softly. "But one day, you will." 3 hours ago, I was standing under the warm, amber glow of the pavilion lights, a ghost at my own wife's party, watching her from a distance. She was a vision in a simple white dress, the fabric flowing around her like water, clinging to her curves in all the ways that made men notice. And notice, they did. I saw their lingering stares, their whispered, appreciative remarks. I'd grown used to it over the years. Alara always drew attention, a moth to her flame. But tonight, it wasn't the attention of strangers that gnawed at me. It was his. Leo. Tall, broad-shouldered, and every bit the southern charmer that I, with my quiet, academic demeanor, was not. He wasn't just any ex-boyfriend of hers. He was the one she always claimed was just a friend, the one whose name would pop up in conversation a little too often, the one who hovered a little too close at parties, who danced a little too intimately, who looked at her like she was still his. And tonight, he was here, weaving in and out of the crowd like a shark, always finding his way back to her. I watched as she laughed at something he said, her head tilted back, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. There was something in her laugh, something wild, free, and uninhibited, that I hadn't seen in years. Not with me. She looked alive in a way that felt like a slap to the face, a public declaration of my own inadequacy. The music, a lazy, bluesy tune, shifted to a slower tempo, and before I could process what was happening, before I could steel myself for the inevitable, Leo extended his hand to her. She hesitated for a split second, a brief, almost imperceptible pause that I would later cling to in my mind like a drowning man clutching a piece of driftwood. But then she took it. He led her to the dance floor, his hand resting far too low on the small of her back, a gesture of casual, arrogant possession. I should have walked away. I should have turned my back on the scene unfolding before me, on the slow, deliberate twisting of the knife in my gut. But I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the spot, my eyes glued to the two of them as they swayed in the center of the dance floor. The way her body moved against his, a fluid, familiar rhythm, was an intimacy that made my stomach churn. His hand slid down her back, his fingers grazing the delicate curve of her hips. She pushed it away, a small, almost playful gesture, but she didn't leave his arms. That was the part that cut the deepest. For a moment, a desperate, foolish moment, I told myself it was nothing. Just a dance. Just an old friend enjoying the music, the atmosphere. But then Leo leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear as he whispered something that made her smile. No, not smile. Smirk. It wasn't the kind of warm, genuine smile you give your husband at the end of a long, tiring day. It was the kind of sly, knowing, secretive smile you give a man who still has a hold on you, a man who knows your secrets. I couldn't take it anymore. I made my way through the crowd, each step fueled by a toxic cocktail of anger, jealousy, and a profound, bone-deep sadness. When I reached them, I forced a smile that I hoped looked natural, though my heart was pounding a frantic, chaotic rhythm in my chest. Leo, I said, my voice surprisingly calm, though laced with an edge I couldn't hide. Mind if I cut in? Alara turned to me, her expression unreadable, a mask of cool, calm indifference. There was no guilt, no embarrassment. Hey, baby, she said, her voice lazy, almost bored. It's just a dance. We were catching up. You don't mind, do you? I looked at Leo, whose smirk mirrored hers, a silent, shared joke at my expense. His hand was still on her waist, and he didn't make any move to step away. Yeah, David, he said, his tone dripping with a condescending mockery. Just a friendly dance. No harm in that, right? His words, his casual use of my name, his smug, triumphant grin, it all hung in the air between us, a challenge, a declaration of war. I felt the weight of the crowd around us, their eyes, curious and hungry, flickering between the three of us like spectators at a gladiator match, waiting for the first drop of blood. My jaw tightened as I turned back to Alara. This isn't a prom, Alara, I said, my voice low, controlled. It's a party. With your husband. And 24 people who know both of us. Her eyes flashed with something I couldn't place. Defiance, maybe. David, stop, she said, her tone sharp, dismissive. You're making a scene. Leo's just being his usual self. You don't have to. Her words were cut off by Leo, who chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that made my blood run cold. Don't worry, Alara, he said, his eyes still locked on mine. I can handle your boy here. That did it. Before I could think, before I could reason, before I could stop myself, I grabbed Leo's wrist, yanking his hand off my wife. Enough, I said, my voice trembling with a barely contained, white-hot anger. The crowd stilled, the music fading into the background as all eyes turned to us. Leo's smirk widened as he leaned closer to me, his breath hot and smelling of whiskey against my ear. Careful, Professor, he whispered, a taunt, a threat. You wouldn't want to embarrass yourself. I stepped back, my fists clenched at my sides, every part of me, every fiber of my being, wanting to hit him, to wipe that smug, arrogant expression off his face. But I knew I wouldn't win. Not here. Not like this. I turned to Alara one last time, my eyes, I'm sure, reflecting the full, devastating extent of my heartbreak. Enjoy your dance, I said quietly, my voice laced with a bitterness that was both foreign and all-consuming. Then I walked away, leaving her and Leo on the dance floor, a triumphant, united front, as the crowd, a chorus of hushed, excited whispers, murmured behind me. I drove home in a thick, suffocating silence, gripping the steering wheel as though it were the only thing tethering me to a reality that was rapidly, violently, slipping away. The hum of the engine was the only sound in the car, a low, monotonous drone against the loud, chaotic, and relentless storm of my thoughts. I replayed the scene at the party over and over again in my mind, dissecting every glance, every smirk, every touch that had passed between Alara and Leo, each one a fresh, twisting turn of the knife. I pulled into the driveway and killed the engine, but I didn't get out. The house loomed before me, dark and silent, a stark, painful contrast to the noise and chaos of the party. It wasn't late, not by party standards, but the boys were at a friend's house for a sleepover, and there was no one waiting for me inside. For a moment, a long, desperate moment, I considered turning the car back on and driving, somewhere, anywhere. But I couldn't. Not yet. Finally, I forced myself out of the car and into the house. The familiar creak of the door as it opened felt strangely alien tonight, like I was stepping into someone else's life, someone else's pain. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter, the sharp clatter echoing in the silence, and stared at the room around me. The table where we ate dinner as a family, the fridge covered in the boys' crayon drawings and photos from happier, more innocent times, it all felt so distant now, like it belonged to a story I'd read long, long ago. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, unscrewed the cap, and took a long, deep sip. The cold liquid slid down my throat, a momentary, welcome numbness against the raw, burning ache in my chest. I sat at the table, my fingers tracing the familiar grain of the wood, as though it held the answers I couldn't find anywhere else. What was I supposed to do? Confront her? Demand answers? I knew Alara. I knew she'd have an explanation ready, a carefully crafted narrative that would make it all seem insignificant, harmless. It was just a dance, she'd say. Leo's an old friend. You're overreacting. Maybe she'd even laugh it off, a tinkling, dismissive sound, turning the blame back on me for being jealous, for being insecure. And maybe, just maybe, she'd be right. Maybe I was overreacting. Or maybe, just maybe, I wasn't. I looked at the photo on the fridge, a snapshot of David catching his first football, his face a perfect, radiant picture of pride and joy. My throat tightened as I thought about our boys, about what this, all of this, would do to them. What kind of father would I be if I let my own insecurities, my own heartbreak, destroy their family, their sense of security? But this wasn't just about the boys. It was about us. Me and Alara. It was about the cracks in our marriage, the small, almost invisible fissures that had been growing for years, now threatening to split our life wide open. I'd ignored them for so long, had papered over them with a desperate, foolish hope, convincing myself that our love, our history, was enough to hold us together. But tonight, for the first time, I couldn't ignore them anymore. They were gaping, ugly wounds, and they were bleeding the life out of us. I took another long sip of my beer and rested my head against the cool, solid wood of the table. I let the full, crushing weight of it all press down on me. The love I still, foolishly, felt for Alara, the white-hot anger at her carelessness, her disrespect, and the deep, profound ache of knowing that she'd never, ever, looked at me the way she looked at Leo tonight. I stayed there for what felt like hours, lost in a dark, swirling sea of thought. At some point, I realized the house was too quiet, the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that wasn't just the absence of noise but the presence of something heavier, something colder. Loneliness. Emptiness. I finished my beer and stood, my movement sluggish, heavy. Upstairs, in the bedroom we'd shared for 8 years, I found the suitcases from our last family vacation tucked away in the back of the closet. As I began to pack, a strange, almost surreal calm settled over me. It wasn't rage. It wasn't despair. It was a cold, hard clarity. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I packed methodically, each item finding its place in the suitcase like a piece of a puzzle I was finally solving. Trousers, shirts, jackets, toothbrush, razor, medications. The small, mundane, almost laughable details of leaving your life behind. When I finished, I stood in the doorway looking back at the room. The bed we'd shared, the photos on the dresser, the closet, now half empty. It all looked so ordinary, so painfully, deceptively normal. But I knew I couldn't stay. Not anymore. I carried the suitcases downstairs and placed them by the front door, a silent, stark declaration of my intent. Then I went to my office, sinking into the familiar comfort of my leather chair and letting the darkness of the room envelop me. I unscrewed another beer and stared at the faint, distant glow of the streetlight outside. The house was silent again, but this time, it felt like a different kind of silence. The kind of silence that comes just before something profound, something irrevocable, happens. I took a long, slow sip, letting the weight of the decision settle over me, a heavy, unshakable finality. When Alara walked through that door, there would be no turning back. I didn't know what I'd say, or how she'd react, but I knew one thing for certain. By the end of the night, nothing would ever be the same. The sound of the front door opening, a familiar, grating creak, jolted me from my thoughts. I stayed seated in the dimly lit office, my heart a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs, listening as Alara's heels clicked against the tile. She paused, a beat longer than usual, and I knew she'd seen the suitcases. My pulse quickened, but I stayed still, waiting for her reaction, for the inevitable explosion. "David?" she called out, her voice sharp, edged with a confusion that quickly morphed into anger. The sound of her steps grew louder, more urgent, as she moved down the hallway. "What is this? What's going on?" I took a deep breath and leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, the shadows cloaking me like armor, giving me the illusion of a strength I desperately needed. When she appeared in the doorway, her eyes, wide and searching, locked on mine. She didn't look angry, at least not yet. Mostly, she just looked bewildered, lost. "You're crazy," she said, her voice rising as she gestured wildly toward the suitcases. "You're leaving. You're leaving me and our two boys because of one stupid mistake? Over Leo?" I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to speak just yet. I wanted to stay calm, to avoid turning this into the kind of shouting match we'd had so many times before. But the raw, genuine pain in her voice, it cut through me like a blade. She stepped into the room, her arms crossing tightly over her chest, a defensive, defiant posture. "I didn't have an affair," she said, her tone sharp, righteous. "I didn't betray you, David. I made a stupid mistake at a party, a drunken, stupid mistake, and now you're blowing it completely out of proportion." I raised a hand, a silent, simple gesture, signaling for her to stop. She froze mid-step, her eyes narrowing as she tried to read me, to understand the stranger sitting in the shadows. I saw her jaw tighten, her fingers gripping her arms a little harder. "What is this?" she demanded. "What's wrong with you? Why are you acting like this?" I shifted slightly in the chair, leaning back into the darkness. "I had a moment of clarity tonight," I said quietly, the words feeling foreign, strange in my own mouth. Her brow furrowed. "What does that even mean? A moment of clarity?" She shook her head in frustration. "Stop with the cryptic nonsense, David. Just talk to me." I looked at her then, really looked at her. The woman I'd loved for 8 years, the mother of my children. She was still so beautiful, standing there in her wrinkled party dress, her dark hair slightly disheveled. But there was a distance between us now, a vast, unbridgeable chasm. "I realized something tonight," I began, my voice steady but low. "Something I should have seen years ago." Her arms fell to her sides, her expression shifting from anger to a palpable, growing unease. "What are you talking about?" I hesitated, choosing my words with a deliberate, painful care. "Alara, this isn't about Leo. It's not about the party. It's about us. It's about who we are and who we've become." She stared at me, her lips parting slightly, as though she wanted to interrupt, but no words came out. I pressed on, my voice growing firmer, more resolute. "I saw our life tonight, the life we've built together, and for the first time, I truly understood that something is missing. Something has been missing for a long, long time." Her eyes widened, a flicker of genuine fear crossing her face. "Missing?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean, missing?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair, a gesture of weariness, of defeat. "I love you, Alara. I always have. But love isn't enough to fix this. It isn't enough to make up for everything we've lost." She shook her head, taking another step closer, her denial a desperate, frantic thing. "We haven't lost anything," she insisted. "We're just going through a rough patch." "Every marriage has rough patches, David. That doesn't mean you throw everything away." Her words struck a nerve, a raw, exposed part of me, and I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor with a harsh, grating sound. She flinched, startled by the sudden, violent movement. "This isn't a rough patch," I said, my voice sharper than I intended, each word a carefully aimed dart. "This is years of silence, of pretending, of going through the motions. And I can't do it anymore." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked away, as if trying to collect herself, to find the right words, the right argument. "So what?" she said after a moment, her voice trembling. "You're just going to leave? Walk away from me, from the boys, from everything we've built?" I took a step toward her, my own voice softening, the anger giving way to a deep, profound sadness. I'm not walking away from the boys. I'll always be there for them. But you and me, Alara, we're broken. And I don't think we can fix it. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky, ragged breath. You're giving up, she said finally, her voice barely audible, a statement of fact, not a question. You're giving up on us. I hesitated, my chest tightening at the sight of her tears, at the raw, undeniable pain in her eyes. No, I said quietly. I'm not giving up. I'm giving us both a chance to find something better. Something real. She stared at me, her expression a mixture of heartbreak and a dawning, terrible disbelief. You're making a mistake, David, she whispered. A huge mistake. Maybe, I replied, my voice steady, though my heart was breaking. But I've made plenty of those already. This time, I need to do what feels right. For both of us. The silence between us was heavy, suffocating. She looked at me as though she didn't recognize the man standing before her. And in that moment, I wasn't sure I recognized myself, either. The room was thick with tension, the kind of oppressive weight that presses on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Alara stood across from me, her face pale, her hands trembling at her sides. The fire in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by something I couldn't quite place, fear, maybe, or guilt. I wasn't sure anymore. She finally broke the silence, her voice a fragile, trembling thing. You keep saying we're broken, David, she said. But you won't tell me why. You just keep blaming me, saying I don't love you, that I don't care about us. It's not fair. Fair. I echoed, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping my lips before I could stop it. You want to talk about fair, Alara? Fine. Let's talk about fair. Was it fair when I stood there tonight, watching you dance with Leo? Watching his hands on you, his smug, triumphant grin daring me to do something? Was it fair that I had to walk away because I knew, if I didn't, I'd lose what little dignity I had left? Her eyes widened, and she took a step back, shaking her head, a gesture of denial. David, that wasn't... Don't, I interrupted, my voice sharp, cutting. Don't you dare tell me it wasn't what it looked like. Don't insult me like that. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For once, my articulate, silver-tongued wife didn't have an explanation. And the silence that followed, thick and heavy, was louder than any argument we could have had. I stepped closer, my gaze locked on hers, pinning her in place. How long, Alara? I asked, my voice quieter now but no less intense, each word a carefully aimed arrow. How long have you been letting him come between us? Her face crumpled, and she turned away, crossing her arms over her chest as if to protect herself from my words. It's not like that, she said softly, her voice muffled. Leo and I, it's complicated. Complicated? I repeated, the word tasting like poison on my tongue. What's complicated about betraying your husband, Alara? What's complicated about lying to the father of your children? She spun back to face me, her eyes flashing with a desperate, defensive anger. I didn't betray you, she snapped. Not like that. I've never slept with him. I swear, David, I haven't. I studied her, my eyes searching hers for any sign of a lie, any flicker of deceit. Her gaze met mine, wide, earnest, and for a moment, a foolish, desperate moment, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to cling to the hope that whatever else had happened, whatever line she had crossed, she hadn't crossed that final, unforgivable one. But then she looked away, her gaze dropping to the floor, and I saw it. The hesitation, the guilt, the lie. My stomach churned. Maybe you didn't, I said, my voice tight, strained. But you wanted to, didn't you? Her silence was my answer. I stepped back, running a hand through my hair, a gesture of frustration, of defeat. God, Alara, I muttered, shaking my head. I knew things weren't perfect between us, but I never, ever, thought it was this bad. She took a tentative step toward me, her hands outstretched, a pleading gesture. It's not what you think, David, she pleaded, her voice a raw, desperate whisper. Leo, he's familiar. He's from a time in my life when things were simpler, easier. I don't know why I let myself get caught up in it, but it wasn't because I don't love you. I shook my head, a hollow, humorless laugh escaping my lips. You keep saying you love me, Alara, but your actions, they tell a different story. Do you even realize what you've done? Every time you let him get close, every time you let him touch you, you're not just hurting me. You're hurting us. Our family. Our boys. Tears streamed down her cheeks, a river of belated regret. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, a mixture of pain, guilt, and a desperate, clinging hope, I know, she whispered. I know I've screwed up. But I didn't mean to. I never meant to hurt you, David. I turned away, unable to look at her anymore, unable to bear the sight of her pain, the pain she had brought upon us both. Intent doesn't matter, Alara, I said quietly, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. It's the result that counts. And the result is this. I don't trust you. Not anymore. Her sob, a sharp, ragged sound, caught in her throat, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse. But she stayed standing, her voice trembling as she asked the question I'd been dreading, the question that would seal our fate. So, what now? Are you just going to leave? Throw everything away over something that didn't even happen? I faced her again, my expression hard, unyielding. This isn't just about tonight, I said, my voice low, controlled. This is about every time you've put him above me. Every time you've made me feel like I'm not enough. It's about years of feeling like a placeholder in my own marriage, a supporting character in my own life. Her lips quivered, and she reached for me, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to bridge the chasm between us. But I stepped back, out of her reach. David, please, she begged. I know I've made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go to therapy, talk to someone, anything. Just don't give up on us. I stared at her, my chest tightening at the sight of her tears, at the raw, undeniable pain in her eyes. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to take her in my arms and pretend that everything would be okay, that we could rewind time, erase the mistakes, and start over. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I'm not giving up, Alara, I said, my voice breaking, the words a betrayal of my own heart. I'm letting go. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, her body racked with sobs, her hands covering her face. I watched her for a moment, my own heart breaking all over again, a symphony of grief and rage and a profound, bottomless sadness. But I didn't move to comfort her. This was a wound that no amount of love, no amount of tears, no amount of regret could heal. The night air was sharp and cold, biting against my skin as I stood by the edge of the lake, the faint, distant strains of a southern rock band still playing from the pavilion. The party, a world of laughter and light, was oblivious to the darkness that had just churned inside me. I stared out over the dark, placid water, my reflection distorted and wavering, a perfect metaphor for the life I was about to leave behind. I should have left right then. I should have gotten in the car, driven home, and started packing, started the process of dismantling the life we had so carefully built together. But something held me there, a strange, electric tension in the air, or maybe just the sheer, crushing weight of all I'd seen, all I'd felt. And then I heard the footsteps. They were uneven, clumsy, shuffling through the dry leaves and twigs behind me. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. I could feel his presence before I saw him, a foul, cloying miasma of arrogance and cheap whiskey. David, Leo said, his voice slurred with the kind of over-the-top confidence that only alcohol can bring. Didn't think you'd run off so quickly. What happened? Couldn't handle a little competition? I clenched my fists at my sides, my knuckles turning white, forcing myself to stay calm, to breathe. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Not yet. He laughed, a low, mocking sound that grated against my nerves, a sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Man, you really are something, he said, stepping closer, invading my personal space. Always watching, never acting. Do you even know what you're doing here? Or is this just your way of pretending you're still in control? I turned slowly to face him, my gaze locking onto his. Even in the dim, dappled light of the moon, I could see the smug, triumphant grin plastered across his face, the kind of self-satisfied grin that made my blood boil, that made me want to do things I had never, ever imagined myself capable of. Go back to the party, Leo, I said, my voice steady, controlled. You've had your fun. It's over. He tilted his head, his grin widening, a flash of white teeth in the darkness. Oh, it's over, is it? You think you can just walk away and leave me to pick up the pieces of your pathetic, broken marriage? You think Alara is going to stay loyal to you after tonight? The sound of her name on his lips, so casual, so proprietary, was enough to break the fragile, precarious hold I had on my anger. Before I could stop myself, before I could think, before I could reason, I took a step forward, closing the distance between us, my own body a coiled spring of tension and rage. You don't know a damn thing about my marriage, I said, my voice a low, dangerous growl, the words ground out through gritted teeth. Leo laughed again, the sound cutting through the quiet stillness of the night like a rusty saw. "Oh, I know plenty," he said, his tone dripping with a condescending, infuriating mockery. "I know she's bored with you. I know she's been dreaming about me for years, even while she's lying next to you in that big, empty bed of yours. And I know that no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you'll never be enough for her." That was it. The line. The point of no return. I swung before I even realized what I was doing, my fist a blur of motion in the darkness, connecting with his jaw with a sickening, satisfying thud. The force of the punch sent him staggering back, his laughter replaced by a sharp, surprised grunt of pain. For a moment, a brief, fleeting moment, I thought it was over, that he'd back down, that he'd finally realize he'd gone too far. But Leo wasn't that kind of man. He straightened, wiping a trickle of blood from the corner of his mouth with the back of his hand, and smirked. "Finally," he said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "I was starting to think you didn't have it in you." He lunged at me, his larger, heavier frame colliding with mine, sending us both tumbling to the ground. The breath was knocked out of me as I hit the hard, unforgiving dirt, his weight pressing down on my chest, suffocating me. His fist came down hard, a brutal, jarring impact against my cheek, and I tasted the coppery tang of my own blood. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I shoved him off with everything I had, a primal, desperate surge of adrenaline, rolling onto my knees and swinging wildly, blindly. My fist caught him in the stomach, a solid, satisfying blow, and he doubled over, gasping for air. I didn't wait. I grabbed his shirt, a ridiculously expensive silk thing that ripped in my hand, pulling him to his feet and slamming him against a nearby, unyielding tree. "You don't get to talk about her like that," I spat, my voice a raw, trembling a testament to the rage that had finally, irrevocably, been unleashed. "You don't get to touch her. You don't get to act like she's yours." Leo coughed, his smug grin faltering as he struggled against my grip. "She'll always be mine," he rasped, his voice a hoarse, ragged whisper. "No matter what you do, David. You'll always be second best." His words, meant to be the final, killing blow, hit harder than any punch. But I didn't let go. I couldn't let him win. Not this time. Not like this. I tightened my grip, my knuckles turning white as I held him against the rough bark of the tree. And then, just as quickly as it had started, it was over. The fight, the bravado, the arrogance, it all drained out of him, his body going limp, heavy, in my grasp. I let go, stepping back, watching as he slumped to the ground, a pathetic, broken heap, coughing and clutching his ribs. For a moment, a long, breathless moment, I just stood there, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. My fists were raw, my face throbbing where he'd hit me, but I didn't feel the pain. All I felt was the immense, crushing weight of what I'd done, and the cold, stark realization that it wouldn't change anything. Leo looked up at me, his smug smirk replaced by something else, something I'd never seen in his eyes before. "Fear. You think this makes you a man," he said, his voice a hoarse, ragged whisper. "You think this makes you better than me?" I didn't answer. I just turned and walked away, leaving him there in the dirt, his words, a final, desperate taunt, following me like a shadow. I stood in the hallway, the polished hardwood cool beneath my feet, staring at the suitcases by the door. The air in the house was thick with a palpable, suffocating tension, the weight of 1,000 unspoken words pressing down on both of us. Alara was sitting on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped so tightly together that her knuckles were white, as if she could hold herself together through sheer, desperate willpower. Her tear-streaked face was pale, her lips trembling as she tried, and failed, to form the words that wouldn't come. "Alara," I began softly, breaking the heavy, fragile silence. She looked up at me, her eyes, wide and pleading, a mirror of the pain that was churning inside me. "David, please," she whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. "Don't do this." I took a deep, steadying breath, forcing myself to stay calm, to keep my own emotions in check. "This isn't what I want," I said, my voice steady but heavy with an emotion I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just anger. It wasn't just sadness. It was a profound, bone-deep weariness. "It's not about punishing you or running away. It's about facing the truth, Alara, even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts." She stood abruptly, her hands reaching for me, a desperate, instinctual gesture. But I stepped back, keeping the safe, necessary distance between us. "What truth?" she demanded, her voice breaking, a fragile, desperate sound. "That you're giving up on us? On everything we've built?" That's not you, David. You don't just quit. I ran a hand through my hair, a gesture of frustration, of a heartbreak so deep it felt like a physical wound. I'm not quitting, Alara. I'm letting go. There's a difference. Her face crumpled, and she sank back onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I don't understand, she sobbed. I don't understand how we got here. Neither did I. Not entirely. But I knew, with a terrible, unshakable certainty, that we couldn't stay here, not in this limbo of unspoken truths and quiet resentments, pretending that everything was fine when it so obviously, so painfully, wasn't. I sat down in the armchair across from her, leaning forward, my elbows on my knees, a silent plea for her to listen, to understand. I love you, I said quietly, the words a painful, bittersweet admission. More than I've ever loved anyone. But love isn't enough, Alara. It's not enough to fix what's broken between us. We've been holding on to this idea of who we were, of who we could be. But it's not real. It hasn't been real for a long, long time. She lifted her head, her tear-filled eyes, wide and searching, locking onto mine. Then let's make it real again, she pleaded, her voice a raw, desperate whisper. We can try, David. We can go to therapy, take a vacation, anything. Just don't give up on me. Don't give up on us. Her words, her desperate, clinging hope, cut through me like a knife. But I shook my head, a slow, tired movement. It's not that simple, Alara. Therapy won't fix the fact that you don't love me the way I love you. A vacation won't change the way we've grown apart, the way we've become strangers in our own lives. Her lip quivered, and she wiped at her tears with trembling hands. You don't know that, she whispered, her denial a fragile, paper-thin shield against the harsh, unforgiving truth. You're just scared. You're scared of failing, scared of letting me in. But we can fix this, David. I know we can. I leaned back, letting out a heavy, weary sigh. If we could, don't you think we would have by now? Don't you think we would have fought for it before it got to this point? Before it all fell apart? Her silence was deafening, a tacit admission of the truth we had both been avoiding for so long. The truth that settled over us like a storm cloud, dark and heavy and inevitable. She knew, just as I did, that this wasn't something we could fix. Not anymore. I stood, walking over to the suitcases and picking them up. The weight of them, the physical manifestation of my departure, felt lighter than the crushing weight in my chest. Alara followed me to the door, her steps hesitant, uncertain, as if she didn't want to get too close but couldn't bear to stay behind. David, she said softly, her voice trembling, a final, desperate plea. Please don't go. I turned to her, setting the suitcases down, and cupped her face in my hands. Her skin was warm and damp from her tears, her eyes, those beautiful, familiar eyes, filled with a pain I couldn't take away. I'll always love you, I said, my voice breaking, the words a painful, final confession. But we both deserve more than this. I kissed her forehead, lingering for a moment, a silent, heartbreaking goodbye, before pulling away. Her hands clutched at my shirt, a desperate, clinging attempt to hold on, but I gently, firmly, pried them away. Goodbye, Alara, I whispered. And then I walked out the door, the sound of her sobs, a symphony of our shared, broken heart, following me into the cold, unforgiving night. The night air was sharp, biting against my skin as I loaded the last of my belongings into the car. The street was quiet, save for the faint, mournful hum of the crickets and the occasional, rustling whisper of leaves in the breeze. I stood by the open trunk, staring at the suitcases and the laptop bag as if they held all the answers I couldn't find, all the words I couldn't say. I closed the trunk with a soft, final click and leaned against the cool metal of the car, trying to ground myself, to find some sense of stability in a world that had just been turned upside down. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the photos of my boys. David, catching his first football, his face a perfect, radiant picture of pride and joy. Michael, grinning with a missing front tooth, his eyes sparkling with mischief. My throat tightened as I thought about what this would mean for them, for our family. But I knew I couldn't stay. Not like this. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, the low, familiar rumble breaking the heavy stillness of the night. As I pulled away from the house, I glanced back one last time. The lights were still on, a warm, inviting glow against the darkness, and I could see Alara's silhouette in the window, her figure blurred but unmistakable, a ghost of the life I was leaving behind. My chest ached with a deep, profound sadness, but I forced myself to keep driving, to focus on the road ahead, on the uncertain, unknown future that was now my own. The city lights blurred as tears, hot and angry, filled my eyes. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I drove aimlessly for hours, letting the steady, rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt drown out the loud, chaotic, and relentless storm of my thoughts. By the time I found a cheap, anonymous motel on the outskirts of the city, the sky was starting to lighten, the first, faint, hopeful hints of dawn breaking through the darkness. I checked in, carrying my bags to the small, sterile room. The bed was unmade, the air stale and smelling faintly of cigarettes and regret. But it didn't matter. I dropped onto the lumpy mattress, staring at the cracked, water-stained ceiling as a bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion finally took over. For the first time in years, I was alone. And for the first time, in a strange, twisted, heartbreaking way, I felt free. The days that followed were a blur of logistics and a deep, gnawing heartache. I met with a lawyer, a man with tired eyes and a kind, sympathetic voice. I signed papers that felt like a betrayal of every promise I'd ever made. I began searching for an apartment, a small, anonymous space close enough to the boys' school that I could still be a part of their lives, could still be their father, even if I was no longer their mother's husband. Each step, each signature, each decision felt like a punch to the gut, a painful, constant reminder of the life I was leaving behind, the life I had lost. Alara called, texted, begged for another chance. Her messages were a chaotic, desperate mix of anger, sorrow, and a pleading, clinging hope. I wanted to respond. I wanted to explain, to make her understand, to make her see the world through my eyes. But I knew it would only make things harder for both of us. So, I stayed silent. The hardest part, the part that broke me in ways I hadn't anticipated, was seeing the boys. Their confusion, their sadness, their quiet, unspoken questions. It was a weight I didn't know how to bear. David, my oldest, asked why I wasn't coming home, why Mommy was always crying. Michael, my youngest, just clung to me, his small, warm hands clutching my shirt as if he were afraid I'd disappear, too. I'm still here, I told them, holding them close, my voice a raw, choked whisper. I'll always be here for you. But I knew it wasn't enough. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I loved them, I couldn't give them the one thing they wanted, the one thing they deserved, their family, whole and unbroken. I could only hope that one day, when they were older, when they were men, they'd understand. As the weeks turned into months, I settled into my new, strange reality. The apartment was small but comfortable, a space that was finally, truly, my own. I threw myself into my work, into being the best, most present father I could be. But there were nights, quiet, lonely, endless nights, when I'd lie awake and think about Alara, about the life we built, about the beautiful, intricate, and ultimately fragile pieces we couldn't put back together. I loved her. I always would. But some wounds, I was learning, ran too deep to ever truly heal.